Sorry, guys, if you're hearing weird background noises. I am traveling this week. I'm in a hotel, so please, I apologize for any interruptions.
I feel your pain. I travel 200 days a year.
Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Good night and good luck.
Hey, folks, welcome back to the Lincoln Project podcast. I am your host, as always, Rick Wilson, and I am excited to be joined today by a person whose expertise in a couple of areas that are more important than you think. I hope today will be very enlightening for you. Her name is Carolyn Orbueno. She is a research scientist, a writer, an investigator of disinformation and of the way in which the algorithmic world is shaping our political perceptions for good and for, well, mostly for ill. Her name is Carolyn Orbueno. You know her on the socials as RVA Wonk. She is incredibly brilliant. And Carolyn, I'm glad to talk to you today because a couple of weeks ago you had an article about how the Trump administration is working to subtly reconfigure the algorithmic space where people are getting their news and their information. And I wanted to start out talking about that, and then I wanted to start out about your 10 tips on how to like overcome the algorithmic tyranny that's out there, because I don't know that people understand that every social media platform shapes your perceptions by curating your feed, curating the information it feeds you, curating what you see every day. So thanks for coming on the show. Let's get started with this story that you did on the Trump administration and how they're gaming the algorithmic system in the country.
So first of all, thank you for having me on. This is
Great to be.
wonderful, and it's great to finally be on a podcast that I listen to a lot anyway. So thank you.
Thank, thank
Um,
you.
so this article I wrote in this concept that I'm calling reverse algorithmic capture. It's kind of a play on words. We have this issue called regulatory capture, which is kind of when the opposite thing happens when companies like lobby the government to do things on their behalf. Except this time, what's happening is that the Trump administration is doing things kind of indirectly and just enough to claim plausible deniability. Um, to try to shape how tech companies and social media companies are shaping their algorithms and sort of our entire information architecture. It's social media platforms. We're talking about search platforms, so things like Google, the ads that you see online. It really is all of the information that we receive. So, a lot of times when we talk about um, moderation and things like that, we're talking just about like moderating content. But here we're talking about changing the entire system through which content is delivered, and sort of doing it in ways that are kind of backhanded and uh, very permanent. That's the other issue is that when you when you actually reconfigure the way information travels and where it feeds and how it feeds out, that's something that even after, assuming Trump leaves office one day, even after he's gone, that infrastructure will still be there, and that's scary.
So talk to us about how they're accomplishing this. Is it because of their relationships with the tech companies, with Twitter, with Facebook, or is it in the actions they're taking to dominate news cycles that are sort of nudging those things along versus an overt manipulation of the algorithmic space?
So it's a little bit of both. So like this recent executive order that Trump signed on like keeping woke out of AI, you know, um, you know, that sounds and it is silly and stupid. However, it also has serious implications because what it's doing is it's saying if you want to work with the federal government now or in the future, this is how you have to set up your artificial intelligence systems. And if you don't do that, then you can't work with us. And as you likely know, the federal government is a huge customer of these companies. And without contracts with the federal government, they're not going to get very far. So basically, the Trump administration is not saying you were forced to do this, but they're saying if you want to stay in business, this is what you have to do. And
Right.
so by telling them, how they have to build. It's not just, their internal memos and tools, and it's the models, that they're training, and the models that end up, being the ones that feed us information.
Right.
And so the Trump administration is telling them indirectly, this is how you have to do it if you want to work with us. They're also doing it, though, like you said, through sort of this domination of the news cycle and these constant distractions, and sort of, it's almost like a game, to see where how they can capture our attention this week, and how they can distract us from something this week by, throwing 10 things over here, while the one thing they kind of don't want us to be looking at is over there. And of course,
Right.
that also in turn is gaming the algorithms, because the algorithms are going to feed us more of what we're engaging with. So if we're engaging with all that stuff over there and not that one thing there, then the algorithm learns, feed us more of that and less of that.
It's funny you mentioned that because right now, in a unique moment, they've been unable to change the subject for the last month off of the Epstein matter, and they've tried everything. And I had somebody, a Democrat, somebody of goodwill, ask me the other day, like, "Why aren't you covering the Sydney Sweeney thing?" I said, "'Cause I'm not taking the algorithmic bait. I'm not playing the game. I'm gonna cover what I'm gonna cover, not what they want me to cover."
The way to do it. That's the way to do it. That's the only that is really kind of the only true way to fight it, is to not play the game. There's that saying that, like, the only way to win a losing game is not
It's
to
not to
play it.
play. Sure, it's
And
War
that,
Games, a
and
classic. You're too young for it, but it was a classic. Um,
but it's hard though, because if you, in media particularly, playing the algorithm game is also what drives engagement. It's what drives audiences,
sure.
to you. And so it's hard not to play the game, but once you start it, then you know you're in for a ride.
So, this is something that I most certainly understand from people inside of Trump's universe, inside his contractors and his consultants and his world. They do understand what they're doing. I mean, Trump doesn't personally understand it. He has a kind of feral instinct for PR and for distraction, but his people do understand how they're playing this game. They do understand that every day they're like leaning into whatever AI they're using, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and saying, what will distract our people the most? What will drive, this the most? They're not ignorant of the power of this algorithmic tweaking that they're engaged in.
That is true. There are absolutely people behind the scenes who know what they're doing. I agree with you. I don't think Trump has a grasp exactly on it. And and that's not even, just tell you, that's not even really a dig at Trump, because most people don't have a true grasp of algorithms. They're difficult, confusing, and most of us never have to work with the code, that underlies algorithms. So why would we have a deep understanding of it? But there are people within Trump's administration who do. And I'll also say, you know, if you look at what some of the things Trump did during the first about 3 months of his administration, he basically gutted, most of our cybersecurity workforce, including
Yep,
like half of the artificial intelligence workforce. So
yep.
he got rid of all of the people who would notice that things were going, askew, who would notice that they were doing things, differently, and that they were doing things to, again, to reshape these algorithms. All of the people who might have, raised a red flag about that aren't in government anymore. And I can't
Uh-huh.
say for certain that's why he did it, but it's certainly convenient that the people who could have raised the alarm are now gone.
Well, I think part of why he purged all those people was that there are two hot spots that Trump can never. You can rely on Trump to react badly on two hot spots. Everything with the Epstein universe, Maxwell, Epstein, etc. The other hot spot that he hates with the fire of a billion suns is anytime someone says the truth about foreign interference in the 2016 and 2020 elections. He loses his mind. He goes rip shit every time that comes up. And so that's, I think, the other reason, because Trump understands at some basal level that in 2016, the Russians did juice along his campaign. And it's very interesting how much they're still overreacting to that, and it's a real tell. But this is where one of the places where I started to know of your work was way back in 2016 and 17 when you were parsing out and taking apart a lot of the agitprop and a lot of the online manipulation of Facebook and other platforms and Twitter that the Russians were directly engaged in to elect Donald Trump.
That so, that was when I got my start in this world. Actually, what when I see these efforts that are continuing and actually to this day, being revived to deny, quote unquote Russia Gate, as they like to call it. I can say that before our intelligence agencies were telling us about it, way back in like 2014, 2015, I sort of accidentally saw the start of this
Right.
stuff, studying something completely. I was studying Ebola and ended up seeing what was the start of.
Talk to us. I know this part of your origin story, but I don't think most people do. Talk to us about how studying the information around Ebola actually led you into this revelation about what the Russians were up to.
So we were studying just how that basically how people and organizations were talking about Ebola, focusing on risk communication. And if you remember back during the Ebola epidemic, the conversation at times, particularly as it got closer to the US, as we started to bring patients to the US, and people started to, talk about an outbreak here, the conversation started to get heated. It was no longer just a conversation about a virus. It was now a conversation about immigration, about, borders, it the very much similar to conversations we're still having now. But it was right around then, that shift, as it started to go from just something that was happening in Africa to something that all of a sudden was coming here. And the the tenor and just the tone of the conversation shifted almost overnight. It was like it went from being, again, a conversation about a virus and the typical, if you think about like a word cloud with all these terms related to virus and blood and all the things related to Ebola. And then all of a sudden, one day, you look at the same thing you've been looking at for a year, and now you're seeing things about automatic weapons and rape. And there were like four or five things that kept appearing in the middle of these conversations about Ebola that I had never seen before. And then gradually, actually, the first things we saw were related to the UK and Brexit. And that was kind of the very first inkling that, okay, there's something political here. And then very quickly after that, you started to see things about, again, in the US, it was refugees, immigration, borders, all of those things. And of
Mhm.
course, at the time, I didn't know what I was seeing. I didn't know. I
Right,
didn't know this was Russia. That wasn't my area of expertise.
right.
I only figured out that's what we were seeing later. But it was there, it was absolutely there. It was looking back, thinking about the accounts and the types of conversations. I mean, it was exactly what we saw in 2016.
Which is exactly what the intelligence community has concluded in multiple different iterations of investigating 2016, that it was a cohesive Russian-driven internet research agency, as innocuous as that sounds. It's a building in St. Petersburg, chock full of Russia's best disinformation experts, and they were pumping out content. And and for all the people look down on Russia appropriately for its moral and political and business failings, Russia is a third world country with a first-rate intelligence service and a first-rate propaganda service. So they saw that it was inexpensive to disrupt American democracy, um, even before Trump came on the stage formally, and it was something that they could do where they couldn't exercise any kind of hard power against us. They could exercise this form of soft power. Now, the algorithm um, behind all these social media platforms is so closely guarded as a secret. It makes nuclear weapons secrets look like they're in the phone book. These companies hold these things in the most secure possible manner. They 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 understand that their revenues and their eyeball retention ability, which are linked, um, depend on using certain cognitive and behavioral traits of human beings to keep them locked on that screen. And as people like Trump and as people like the Russians have learned to exploit those algorithmic platforms, even without knowing what the formula is, the role of cognitive and behavioral understanding, which is your area, has become something that people in the pro democracy space have had a lot of trouble grappling with. So you call it the algorithm of tyranny. So talk to us about what that algorithm does to people as it sorts them and selects them and narrows them down in the focus of what they, you want X, we're going to give you 20X. Um, Talk to us about how that algorithm works, and then I want to go through some things that you have written about what people can do to sort of get out of the algorithmic funnel.
So this issue of algorithmic tyranny, and I did a little very short video the other day just because somebody asked a question and I wanted to respond to it. And one of the things I said in that video that, I think it kind of captures the core of this issue is that one of the things that these algorithms are doing is, by curating this information and targeting us, with specific information saying, based on these characteristics, this person will respond this way with this information. So we're going to feed this to them at this time. And really, what it's doing is it's hacking your brain to make you rely on a system of information processing that is faulty by nature. So we have sort of two different systems through which we can process information. There's the logical, rational, methodical one that we use when we're going, when we're working, when we're making lists and thinking about like how to take apart a car engine, one step, one at a time, two at a time, thinking about things very methodically and slower. Then we have this other system of our brain that's more instinctual, that's emotion based, and that's a lot faster. And we need both of them because that other system, the fast, emotion-based one, is the one that saves us if we need to jump out of the way of a car or if we're getting chased by a lion. That was the system that saved us when we were hunter-gatherers.
Right, the evolutionary, reason why we are here talking on Riverside instead of eating animal bones around a fire somewhere,
Exactly. So there is a
or
reason
being
for it,
eaten.
we need it, but we also need to be able to control when we use those systems. So this emotion-based, instinctual system kicks in during emergencies, times of stress, but it also kicks in when our emotions are incited. So when we all of a sudden feel fearful or anger or, a lot of times now it's this outrage at some injustice. When we feel something like that, that also flips us over to that other system of information processing that takes us away from our more logical, rational, methodical thought processes. So, why the reason I'm calling it tyranny is because really what it's doing is it's stealing your ability to control how you perceive the world. And, that is one of the most fundamental things, we have as people is the ability to perceive the world around us and to control that. And these algorithms are essentially taking that away from us. And I can't think of a clearer example of tyranny than really hacking your mind and, your ability to control how you perceive the
Right.
world.
It's like Dostoevsky said, "The best way to keep a man in prison is to convince him he's not in prison." Um, so looking at this system that was built by by tech companies, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or Snap or TikTok, when they built these things, I truly believe this, and I'm trying to give them a little bit of grace and latitude. When they built these things, I don't think they intended to craft platforms that could be leveraged in a political space that would lead to the downfall of our democratic system of government.
I think
But they
that's
really have sort of empowered um, people who are willing to abuse these platforms more than they have empowered people who would like to use them for good.
I think that's
So
right. I think, that by design, they are neutral. Algorithms, platforms are neutral by design. However, humans are the ones putting the input into them, and that is by
Right.
design never neutral. So that
Never neutral.
it's depending on who is at the control, that's the way the platform's going to go. And so they certainly could be used for good. Unfortunately, though, that's not what we've seen, because when you have when profit is the motive, you're going to do what it takes to get profit. And what gets profit is engagement. What gets engagement?
This is
Well, it's things that, again, are that emotion based, what's going to keep us scrolling, not what's
right.
going to inform us and, help us become better citizens.
Has the rise of the sort of micro content platforms, TikTok, Instagram Reels, Facebook Reels, Twitter, has that is that part of a like a broader short circuiting of our cognitive, like our rational cognitive processes?
So I really truly believe we are seeing, especially in younger people, changes in our brains and changes in the way we are processing
This
information.
is
Children now, I mean, children are not known for having long attention spans anyway, but I really think we are seeing shortening of attention spans to the point where people now are, if you're asking them to engage and take in content in more than a 2-minute sound bite, you're you're not you're not gonna have much luck. People want, they want it fast. They want it, a little TikTok that's entertaining. And to some degree, okay, you can play that for good. You can go out there and put out pro democracy TikToks and people will engage with that. But I don't think we want to be in a world where we are seeing changes in, both the structure and process of our brains, um, based on the content we're putting out there. That, we're literally making people less able, and it's kind of scary too, because this goes along with the rise of AI and people worrying about AI taking our jobs. And there's this whole thing called cognitive atrophy, and I think this is part of it. That we're seeing people using less of certain parts of their brain, and relying more on these short, engaging, interesting clips. And I think, ultimately that is not for the good of humans anywhere on the political spectrum.
to me, there's one interesting note about like TikTok in particular. It is a profoundly powerful platform with younger voters in this country and younger people in this country. But China does not allow TikTok to operate in China like it does here. In China, TikTok has a lot more content about the benefits of education and of work and of being in society. In American TikTok is like, I hate everything. I'm depressed. It feeds this incredible portfolio of negative attitudes and behaviors, and 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 I still have a deep belief that TikTok is a weapon, not a platform. But we can sort that as we go. Which is why I think, by the way, that Trump wants to. I don't think Trump cares about the harm TikTok does now. I think they understand someone around him is smart enough to understand the power it has, so that if it's in the hands of a Trump ally or somebody at least who is intimidated by Trump, then they will weaponize that platform very, directly to
Yeah,
provide him political and his party political benefit.
and I think it is what I would consider a cognitive weapon. That it is so powerful in that, it is reshaping and reconfiguring neural
Right.
networks in our brains and how we process information. And that's powerful. If something that can literally rewire our brains and change the way we're processing information, that, and it's just right there for anybody. It's not like it's a
Yeah.
secret weapon the military has. It's just something anybody can access on the internet.
Which is, which kind of leads me to our wrap up here. Um, uh, you've written a piece about how you resist this algorithmic tyranny. Can you walk folks through some of the steps they need to take to A, be more aware of what's happening, and B, to resist what's happening?
Sure. So, the first thing is just understanding the algorithm. And again, you don't have to have like an in-depth computational understanding of it, but just understand what the incentives are. It wants you to engage. So it's going to feed you stuff to make you engage. So if you're consistently engaging with a certain topic or whatever, it's going to feed you more of that. And understand that it's wanting you to engage because the more you engage, the more profit you're making for the platform. And so, it's not feeding you that information out of like the goodness of the algorithm. It's feeding you that because it wants you to keep clicking. So every once in a while, take a break and ask yourself, like, am, am I controlling the road I'm going down, or is the algorithm pushing me down this road? One of the best things I think anybody can do when really engaging with any content online is just to slow down, just to pause and slow down for a second. That's especially true if you're feeling emotional, if you have a strong reaction to something, just take a step back, ask yourself, what am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? And who might want me to feel this way? Who might be trying to provoke this sort of reaction in me? And, don't feel like you have to rush to be the first one to share something. There's not a race. It's okay if you're not the first. And it's much better to be, you know, later and right than early and wrong. So, the biggest thing is slowing down, because that also, again, going back to what we were talking about with those different systems of your brain, slowing down is going to help you go back to that rational, logical, methodical thought process rather than that instinctual emotion based, I'm angry, I have to share this, I'm going to show this to everybody. And then, skipping right over the logical part where you might fact check something and realize the entire thing is fake.
Right.
So that's a big thing. I also put some tips out there about how to conduct better searches, and how to access information from
Right.
multiple sources. Don't just use one search platform. You don't just use one source.
Oh god, I mean, that to me, and I'm a long time, believer in jumping your search systems around, and folks, DuckDuckGo, it has the worst possible branding, the worst name I've ever heard of a platform in the history of all naming of platforms. I mean, it's awful name. It's a terrible name. It gives you clean search results. It does not it does not give you the Google bubble search results because, Google, their algorithmic search feature is also designed to push information to you you want to see. And not that you need to see or that you should see or that a real answer to your question entails, but they're serving ads to you on that platform by giving you things you want to see. And that they know that will make you more likely to click on an ad. So, yeah, DuckDuckGo and other platforms are absolutely. Brave has one. There's a lot. I'm gonna do them a disservice to the rest of them, but that area where AI, um, where non-AI driven search platforms exist is really important
It is.
for doing research.
And if you've never done it before, try doing searches on multiple and search engines, including some, like
Yeah,
Google, the big ones that are driven by AI, and then some that are not, like DuckDuckGo, and compare the results you get and see, what information is at the top when you do the exact same search across these different platforms, and you'll be amazed. It's completely different. It's like different worlds of information, and that exact thing is what the Trump administration is attempting to reconfigure and
right,
restructure, is that entire architecture of how information gets delivered. So the more you can, as sometimes it's not possible, but the more you can turn off and back out of, automated feeds, turn off like, when you're on Twitter, you don't go to your home feed. You don't let it tell
yeah.
you.
Don't go to For You on any platform
Yeah.
that's offering a For You. That is an algorithmic hole. And folks, one other thing, and I just this is one of my personal things. On every platform you're on, you can go on and turn off customized advertising. Almost every single one of them. You'll have to drill down into the settings, but go turn off customized advertising. Go turn off your geographic history of your GPS. Go turn off things that do not directly improve your quality of work on those platforms, because the old Silicon Valley joke is, if a service is free, you are the product, is real with these things. And
Absolutely.
now if the service is free, you're not just the product, you're the target.
Yes. Yes.
So Carolyn, tell folks where they can find you. You have a fantastic Substack called Weaponized. Tell folks where else they can find you on social media.
So, like you said, weaponized spaces on Substack. I am on Twitter, or X. I still refuse to call it X, but you know what I'm talking about. It
I call it Twitter. I'm never calling it the other name.
wonderful. So Twitter, I'm at RVA Wonk. I'm on Blue Sky, RVA Wonk. Pretty much all of the major Instagram, RVA Wonk. So if you search RVA Wonk, whatever the platform, I am probably there, with the exception of Facebook. Uh, I don't do that for.
I have a
all-
Facebook because my publishers made me get a Facebook like 10 years ago, and I'm like,
I keep it to my personal Facebook, and that is closed,
yeah,
and
pretty
I have
much.
like 100 friends, and I'm keeping it that way.
That is the way. All right. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Folks, we appreciate everybody who listens to the Lincoln Project podcast each week. You can also catch me on the Enemies List podcast twice a week, every Friday on the Elephant in the Room podcast. I stream twice a week, once on the strategy session on Lincoln Square, and once on Thursdays on the Lincoln Project, with the breakdown with Maya May, which is increasingly punchy and weird, and we love it that way. Folks, we talk straight to you. We tell you what's going on. We bring you this from our understanding of the world, and we're believers in this American experiment and this republic that we live in, and that's why we fight so hard for it every day. Appreciate all you watching and listening. We'll talk to you again next time. Thanks so much.
Good night and good luck.